For the copper rose, I used two pieces of copper 1/8 of an inch thick. They're a 4.5 inch circle and a 4 inch circle, and then a 3/8 round bar for the stem, and then 1/4 by 3/4 flat bar for the leaves. You could use 5 petals. I chose to do 4 in this particular style of the rose. Lots of interpretation here. So I'm going to start with the petals. I'm using a convex rounding hammer. I run down the center of the petal first and then out to the sides. So I'm trying to stretch some for length and a fair bit for width. I have center punched both of the copper discs. That gives me a target for drilling later on. I'm only heating one of these up at a time. The copper, it can certainly melt very easily in the gas forge, so be cautious when you're working with that. So, right down the center, stretch it out. I'm really thinning those edges out. And you can work the copper right down into a good strong black color. Once it kind of starts resist moving, then I go back for another heat. Yeah, you can see it's pulling out. And I do opposite petals. That just again balances the design a little bit. Copper's really soft to work. You get a lot of movement with every hammer stroke. So I repeat on all 4 petals of all 2 plates, and this is the last petal of the last plate, and just stretching them out. In your initial template, you want enough gap between the petals that you're not actually overlapping the metal when you go to stretch it out. So you're filling in the space, but you're not overlapping it. So this is the 1/4 by 3/4 flat bar. I'm trimming off the corner at roughly 45 degrees. And this becomes one of the petals for the rose. So first thing I'm going to do, knock that corner in, and then I'm going to straighten the point into the middle of the bar. Quarter by 3/4 is a nice size. It gives you enough material that you can actually see the leaf. It's thick enough you can do a lot of texture on it. It's a very handy bar for me. This is a shouldering tool, and it basically creates a notch top and bottom on the bar by hammering on it. And I want to be right at the base of the taper. And I usually go to about half the thickness of the material. So in this case, about 3/8. That gives me the leaf shape at the top. I'll do a little bit draw out on the stem. It's more getting it out of the way than anything else. I'll do further draw out later on. Hammer's coming in at a diagonal, and obviously the leaf portion's over the far edge of the anvil. So this is a 1-inch bolt that I'm using as an anvil block, and I've squared off the shank, and that allows me to get in close to the edge of the leaf and be in a comfortable position on the anvil. Right now I'm going side to side. It's just a straight stretch across the leaf. It does create some texture in the center. The texture on the sides will be removed in the next step. So a little bit of a close-up. Again, showing the lateral stretch on the leaf. So here I'm coming in with the first diagonals. The hammer is sloped so that the edge thins out a lot faster than the center does. And I'll do this on both sides. Close up again. And you can really work in some nice texture with this. The far side. And you can see the look of the leaf there. So it gives you some idea of the angle on the anvil that I'm working at. And the leaf. Now the leaves are flat at this point, and this is where I start using a V stake. And this one clamps into the vise. It could fit into the anvil just as well. And I use a sharp cross-peen hammer to drive that center portion of the leaf down into the V. And then I reflex curve the outer edges of the leaf. I often do that on the anvil. For the camera, I did it here on the tool. And that gives some life, some shape to the leaf. Just about every leaf I do, I'll use this same tool. Very, very handy. It's just a smooth radius on the V. So it's not cutting into the bottom of the leaf. And you can see some of the texture there. So I've cut off the leaf. I leave about an inch, and then it's just drawing that stem portion out. Usually takes me about 2 heats to draw it out and round it off, because then it will be welded onto the main stem of the leaves. I usually target about 1/4 round for the stems on these. You go much thinner, it becomes a weakness. Much thicker, it just doesn't look elegant. These are left a little bit long, and then I end up trimming them to suit. The stem is the 3/8 round bar, and really all I'm doing is breaking that mechanical line on it, giving it some texture all the way along, and some curves, some movement to it. Something to make it a little bit more like a real stem. Some people will pinch out corners for thorns on their roses. That's an option. There's the leaves welded up, and then that gets welded to the stem. I will modify the position of those leaves after the rose is all done. My next step is welding the copper petals to the stem, and then welding the leaves to the stem below the copper petals. Make sure you have really good strong welds, especially on that top plate, because there's going to be a lot of torque going on. MIG welding works. It's not a problem. Just make sure that you're running a little bit hot, because the copper likes to conduct the heat out so fast. So here I'm using the torch, and I'm curling up the right hand edge on the top petal, the top layer of petals. And this is so it tucks in like a spiral as I close up the rose. And I'm using a pair of scrolling pliers here, something that doesn't mar the surface. Copper's soft when you get it hot. You can easily dent it and scratch it. Working around and around. And then the next step is to lift each one of the petals up. So I'm closing up that center portion of the rose. And you want to do this in increments so that you can tuck the next petal inside the last petal, and then the next petal inside that. Once you get them halfway up, you'll be able to crush them into shape using channel locks. Closing it a bit tighter, and then I'll curve the left-hand side of the petal around its neighboring petal. You can see a bit of the curving of the outside of the petal there. So channel locks are great because you can quickly adjust to anything in size. They do slide around a little bit, but I find them really useful for closing these flowers up. And at this stage, I'm not so worried about the look. I'm just trying to get the mechanics done of closing that flower. The look will come after this. Warm it up and just kind of squish it into a central position. Now I use 2 layers. You could certainly use 3 or 4, but then you're going to have to increase both your diameter and then the complexity of the rows. So that creates the center portion. I do exactly the same thing on the bottom layer. The only thing is I don't have to go as tight. Same thing all the way around. Start with the right side. And if you look at roses in nature, they do have a spiral component to them, but you'll often find random petals just overlapping each other. If you've got a fair bit of complexity to your rose, 3, 4, 5 layers, certainly you can add just random overlaps in, but you'll probably want to use thinner sheet to work that style of flower. And I'll bend these up. Try and get things tight. Channel locks help. I can pry on the cold part of the rose in the center and then pry up that outer portion. Difficult to do in the forge, not impossible, but you've now got all the petals hot and everything wants to move on you. So a little bit challenging. I like using the torch for this. Just closing things up. Get it reasonably tight. So once you get the petals closed up as tight as you like, you can do some minor manipulation later on, but you're looking for close to the finished shape of the flower as you're working this. And then I'm going to start switching over, and I'm going to use a pair of needle nose pliers, and I'm just bending the edge back on the flower. So the needle nose, they'll come in, and I'm creating a ripple on the edge. You can see I'm spot heating up at the top, and then I'm just flexing that back, just twisting it back. And I usually space them out maybe 1/4 of an inch, 3/8. It's kind of the look that I'm looking for. And that changes it from, yes, a rose, to something like, oh wow, that really is a rose. It looks more dramatic, it looks more realistic. And I do this on all the petals, generally starting from the middle, working out. It's a very pinch and move and look and see operation. Because sometimes you're trying to fill in the spaces between the top and bottom layers, and then sometimes you're trying to open up spaces as well. So it's really a mixture and a visual thing that you're working for. So you work around, complete all the edges. And this is one of the reasons why you wanted to thin those edges out so far in the beginning, is so that you get a nice easy bend on them. And it's really the top 1/4 of an inch that I'm bending back. It's not very far at all. And it's crimping the edge almost. Now as you work, you're going to develop really heavy oxides on the copper. And you'll see near the end that the copper rose is actually black. So you have to find a way of taking off all of those copper oxides. The traditional way is you put it in an acid bath and it will eat the copper oxides. You'll still have to go in and clean it up with a wire brush or power wire wheel or anything like that. But once you get the top layer of the oxides off, it is faster. What I did is I just used a wire wheel on the grinder and went around and around, cleaned everything up, but it left the center as being quite dark. You can see the finished rows there, and you can see the black oxides as well. And then that all gets power wire wheeled, clean it all up. Sandblasting would be an option too. There you see the finished rows on the right and the original on the left.